Welcome to AP Environmental Science. In this video, we are going to talk a little bit about how energy can be extracted from biomass and how biofuels are generated and used. Now, keep in mind when we're talking about biomass, ultimately this energy is coming from the sun and it's being converted into a stored chemical energy in the tissues of plants. Now, biomass is the by far leading source of renewable energy worldwide, and it's typically used to heat homes and to be used for cooking food. Now, some examples would be things like wood and peat, charcoal, crop residue, and surprisingly, dried out manure cakes. There are several pros and cons to using biomass. The pros or the benefits would be that it is easily accessible and relatively inexpensive. Oftentimes people can just walk out into a nearby wooded area, chop down or gather some of the woody material, and then bring it back to burn to heat their homes and cook food. But the negative is, as you are burning this biomass, it releases some air pollutants, and typically this biomass is actually burned indoors. Now, if you do not have proper ventilation, this can lead to some increases in health issues, particularly respiratory health. Additionally, having this extra harvesting of trees has the potential to lead to deforestation. Now, biofuels are liquid fuels that are made from this plant matter. And these biofuels are able to be direct substitutes for petroleum products. And this is really important because our global reserve of oil that's used for petroleum is non-renewable. So at some point we will run out of that. So making this transition to biofuels is giving us hope that we're going to be able to transition away from that oil resource. Now, there's two types of biofuels. We have ethanol and biodiesel. First, let's talk about ethanol. This is made from fermenting plant-based starches into sugars, and eventually those sugars are turned into alcohol. Now, this alcohol is then mixed with traditional gasoline to make gasohol, and typically we have a 10% mix. So when you're at the gas station, you'll see a little placard next to certain grades of gasoline that says may contain up to 10% ethanol. Some locations even have little placards that say may contain up to 15% alcohol. But you might have also seen E85. Now, E85 is kind of the opposite of gasohol. This is primarily that ethanol and not quite as much gas. So it's called E85 because it has up to 85% ethanol and only about 15% gasoline in there. So again, this is helping to transition away from the reliance on so much oil. Now, biodiesel is a little different than the ethanol. Biodiesel is extracted from modified oil from plants. So we're taking the plant oils and not just that plant material. Now, biodiesel is really fascinating because this can be a direct substitute for diesel fuel. So you can put biodiesel directly into the gas tank instead of using conventional diesel, and things should run just the same. Now, the source for these biofuels really is based on what types of plants can be grown in the region in which they're used. So in using fuels this way, we are able to reduce that transportation cost of moving the, say, oils from the Middle East across the ocean to, say, the United States. So we're able to cut down on that transportation cost by growing what grows best in that particular region. Now, there's positives and negatives to this. Some of the pros is that biofuels are considered carbon neutral, and that's because they are cycling what's called modern carbon, or carbon that's already actively moving within the carbon cycle. Whereas fossil fuels, which are non-renewable resources, those are burning what's called fossil carbon. So carbon that was currently stored within the crust of the earth, it was not actively cycling, so we call that fossil carbon. So biofuels are carbon neutral. If biofuels crops are managed correctly, they have the potential to be renewable resources. Additionally, these can be produced domestically. So again, we're not relying on politics of foreign governments in order to get our fuels. Now there are downsides. The net energy that is produced from these biofuels is typically lower than what you would have from your fossil fuels. So it requires more gasohol to go the same distance as regular gasoline. Additionally, there's a bit of controversy with using biofuels because you are taking land that could have been used to produce food and instead using it to produce energy, so to produce this gasoline. So there's this competition for that fertile agricultural land. And again, this is something that people have debated, and it's really the biggest source of controversy around biofuels. Now, there are some more sustainable solutions. In particular, for producing ethanol, we could transfer away from using corn and sugar beets towards using switchgrass. Now, switchgrass is a perennial, which means that you do not have to replant that particular crop every single year. It keeps growing back from that stable root system. So if we think back to our agricultural topics, we can avoid a lot of those impacts associated with tilling and planting and that turnover of the soil. For biodiesel, we also have technology that's looking into using straight vegetable oil, so used vegetable oil from fryers that could be used as biodiesel. And there's also groups that are working on using algae to produce this biodiesel. And if you're using algae, now you are not using that land space. You can produce this biofuel out in the ocean instead of on the land. So in summary, you should know that biomass is an important fuel source for heating and cooking, be able to describe some of those pros and cons, and also that biofuels are things that we're working on to replace gasoline and diesel, and again, be able to describe some of the pros and cons. Please send me your questions here at the end, and I hope that as you watch this video, you were able to learn something.